The moment I stood up, her laughter stopped mid-breath. Ellis had just made another joke. Something about office husbands, and everyone at the table exploded with laughter. Everyone but me. I was already sliding my chair back, careful not to knock over the ceramic cup of untouched cappuccino in front of me. I remember thinking how steady my hands were, considering how everything else inside me felt like it was about to collapse. She didn't notice at first, too busy tossing her hair, too busy adjusting her blazer in a way that screamed, "Look at me, but don't say you are." And he leaned in like he had earned her, like he'd won some game I didn't even know we were playing. 3 people turned to look as I walked past. One of them, a junior account manager named Trina, opened her mouth like she might say something, but closed it again. I didn't look back. Not until I reached the cafe door. That's when I heard the silence. It had dropped over the group like a flipped switch. The sound of a dozen stir sticks clinking against ceramic cups had vanished, and in that silence, I could hear one word, her voice hesitating. "Well." I didn't answer. I stepped outside and let the door close behind me gently. It wasn't raining, but the sky looked like it might cry on my behalf. That coffee meeting had been her idea. "Let's bring the team together more," she said 3 weeks ago. "A little caffeine and connection." I showed up every time, sat beside her, smiled when she smiled, even laughed when I didn't get the joke. But today, I was just a ghost in her peripheral vision. And it wasn't just her body language. It was the way she poured sugar into Ellis's cup without asking. The way he leaned into her whisper like it was already routine. The way her hand stayed on his forearm for 4 full seconds, while she told a story about our dog, but used his name like she forgot mine. She didn't just ignore me, she erased me, and it worked, because nobody asked where I went. Nobody followed. I walked 4 blocks without knowing where I was going, past a florist, past a closed-down bookstore that still had sun-faded covers in the window. I only stopped walking when my phone buzzed. Unknown sender. "You're not crazy. She's been lying for a while." Check the shared calendar. Friday nights. I stared at the message, then at the sender. No contact name, no photo. Just a number I didn't recognize. The shared calendar. I opened it. My hands were suddenly not so steady anymore. Friday nights were blocked off. Every week labeled Client Debrief, Do Not Disturb. I never questioned it. I just heated leftovers and watched reruns while she worked late. But the calendar had attachments hidden at first, until I scrolled far enough. Receipts, a hotel confirmation, a dinner reservation for 2, all with timestamps that lined up perfectly. And that's when I understood this wasn't just about coffee. This wasn't about Alice making her laugh. This was the beginning of the part, where everything I believed about my marriage would start peeling away quietly, brutally, and in public. I don't remember walking home. I really don't. One minute I was standing outside morning roast staring at that message, and the next I was inside our apartment, the door half shut behind me, my shoes still on. I stood there in the hallway, like I'd forgotten how living in my own home worked. Everything looked exactly the same. Her coat on the hook, our keys in the bowl, the candle on the table that she always lights but never finishes. But suddenly, all of it felt rented. Like nothing inside these walls belonged to me anymore. Not even the air. I sat down on the couch and opened the shared calendar again. I didn't want to. I didn't want to keep digging. But you know, that sick part of your brain that needs to know everything, even if it's going to break you. That part won. The timestamps match too perfectly. Dinner reservations at a place I couldn't afford even if I skipped 2 months of rent. A massage appointment with 2 names on the receipt. A wine tasting. Hotel check-ins long through her company's travel portal under client relations. Of course, it was all there, all of it. Quietly sitting in the calendar I helped her color code 3 years ago. I didn't even know who the sender was. The message was gone by the time I tried to reply. Deleted. No history, just the echo of what they'd shown me. I tried to calm myself down, repeating useless little things like, there has to be an explanation. Or maybe it's just work. But that kind of denial only works if you haven't already seen the evidence laid out like a roadmap to your own humiliation. It was almost noon when she texted me. Zoe. Hey, you okay? That was weird this morning. Can we talk tonight? That was all. No apology, no concern, just detached curiosity. Like I'd spilled a drink at brunch, not quietly walked out on the life we'd supposedly built together. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My fingers hovered over the screen for nearly 20 minutes before I finally threw my phone across the room. It landed on the rug and didn't even crack. Of course, it didn't. I opened my laptop next. I hadn't checked my personal email in weeks. I mostly use it for coupons and software login-ins. But when I signed in, there were 2 new messages that caught my eye immediately, both from addresses I didn't recognize, both with subject lines that made my stomach turn. The first thought, you should see what she's been up to. Sorry. The second, not trying to hurt you, just tired of the lies. My heart thudded like it wanted to quit on me. I clicked the first email. Inside were photos. Her in that same burgundy blazer she wore last Friday, standing outside the Halbridge Hotel with Ellis, laughing, hugging, kissing, his hand on the small of her back, her fingers in his hair. No shame, no hesitation. There was a time when the sight of her smile lit up my whole day. Now it felt like someone had set fire to my insides and walked away whistling. I closed the laptop. I couldn't take any more. But as I sat there on the edge of our beige sofa with a half-eaten granola bar still sitting on the coffee table, I realized something sickening. She didn't even try to hide it. The calendar wasn't locked. The hotel wasn't out of town. The messages were out in the open. She hadn't tried to cover her tracks because she didn't think I mattered enough to check. I wasn't a threat. I was background noise. That broke me more than anything, because I always thought that if someone cheated, at least they'd feel guilty enough to be careful. That maybe, it meant they still had some fear of hurting you. But this was something worse. It was complete emotional invisibility. I think I sat there for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept asking myself the same question over and over again. How long has she been gone, even while she was here? I don't know what to do yet. Tonight, she'll come home. She'll probably pretend nothing's wrong. She might even want to cuddle. Maybe she'll heat up the leftover Thai food and act like we're still in some sitcom marriage. But something's changed in me now. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter, something heavier. And tomorrow morning, I already know what I'm going to do. She walked through the door like nothing had happened, like I hadn't left that cafe in total silence, like her hand hadn't been resting on another man's arm while she told our dog story like it belonged to someone else's life. She came in humming, actually humming, some catchy little tune she probably heard on the car ride back, heels clicking across the floor, tossing her bag on the kitchen island like she was still the star of her own movie. I didn't speak right away. I sat in the armchair near the window, turned halfway toward the door, pretending to scroll on my phone. My heart was pounding, not from rage, but from the pressure of holding back everything I now knew. The emails, the calendar, the photo of her brushing her lips across Ellis's cheek like it was a perfectly normal Friday night. I watched her open the fridge, pour a glass of almond milk like she always did. Still barefoot now. probably to avoid the blisters she got from those designer shoes she swore she'd stop wearing. Everything was ordinary, chillingly ordinary. Then she turned to me and smiled. "Hey," she said casually, sipping her milk like we were a healthy couple. "You left in a weird mood this morning. Everything okay?" There it was, the question. Her tone wasn't worried, not even soft. It was curious, as if she was asking about a paper jam at the office printer. That was when it hit me. She wasn't confused. She just didn't care enough to be afraid. She genuinely didn't believe I had the capacity to push back. She thought she still held the remote control. I stood up slowly, walked past her, and opened the dishwasher just to give myself something to do. My hands needed purpose. My voice was too dry to answer, but I managed to ask, "What do you usually do on Friday nights?" She blinked, tilted her head like a confused cat. "What Fridays?" I said, turning to look at her directly for the first time. "You block them off on the calendar. Client debrief, every week. Just curious, what did those usually involve?" She shifted her weight to one foot. The first flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not guilt, not fear, just calculation. Why, I shrugged. "Got an anonymous message today. Said I should check the calendar." She set her glass down carefully. Too carefully. "Seriously, you're spying on my calendar now?" "No," I said quieter this time. I just looked. Everything was already there. The silence between us stretched like a drawn bowstring. I could feel it vibrating in my chest. And just when I thought she'd crack, that she'd admit something, anything, she gave me the performance of a lifetime. "You know what, Lel? I can't believe this. I'm working my butt off trying to help keep our team together. And you think I'm sneaking around because I had a glass of wine with a coworker?" She laughed short and sharp. Unreal. I didn't move. I just let her unravel on her own. She paced the kitchen like a lawyer on closing arguments, arms flailing, voice rising. She tossed out phrases like, "You never trusted me," and "You're always reading into things as if I hadn't seen the pictures with my own eyes." As if. The scent of Ellis's cologne hadn't practically followed her into the apartment. When she finally stopped moving, she turned to me and crossed her arms. "Are you done accusing me, or are we going to keep pretending you're the victim in this marriage?" That was it. I walked over to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a small padded envelope, and set it on the counter in front of her. She looked down at it like it was a bomb. "What's that?" "Open it." She didn't. Not right away. But she couldn't help herself. She always had to know. She opened it slowly and slid out the contents. Printed photos. The hotel. The dinner. The kiss. A screenshot of the calendar. A receipt with Ellis's name next to hers. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "I didn't print the worst ones," I said quietly. "Didn't see the point." Her face drained of color. She stepped back slightly, like the counter had become too hot to lean on. "Who gave you this?" "Someone who's tired of the lies," I said. "Not sure if it's someone from your team or someone you stepped on the way to whatever promotion you thought this affair would get." "You." She opened her mouth again, closed it, opened it. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. I laughed, but it wasn't joyful. It was dry and bitter and hoarse. It never is. Right, never what it looks like. We stood there, the two of us, inches apart, yet on different planets. She was staring at the evidence of her own undoing. And I was finally beginning to see her without the filter of memory, of old promises of hope. "You never even noticed I was watching you this morning," I said. "You touched his arm and told my stories. Our stories. And when I stood up, you didn't even blink until I was halfway out the door. That's the part that broke me, Zoe. Not the cheating. The eraser." She looked like she might speak again, might spin some last-minute tale. But then she didn't, because she finally saw that I wasn't bluffing. "I'll sleep on the couch tonight," I said. "And tomorrow, you can start figuring out where you're going to live." She nodded, barely. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. I guess even her tears had somewhere better to be. She didn't leave the kitchen right away. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, not even bothering to turn on the lights. I could hear her through the thin apartment walls, the faint, frantic tapping of her phone screen, the clink of the refrigerator door, the rustling of her pacing back and forth. She was unraveling, but doing it quietly, like she still thought she could control the damage if she just said the right thing next. And honestly, part of me expected the door to open and for her to come in, sit next to me, and try to start the healing process. Not because she deserved it, but because that's how these things usually go in the stories we tell ourselves. But the door didn't open. Instead, I heard the soft creak of the sofa cushions as she sat down in the living room, just far enough away to avoid confrontation, but close enough to pretend proximity still meant something. Then the silence set in, the kind of silence you only get after a truth bomb detonates, and all the fake intimacy has been vaporized. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. I just lay there with my eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan rotating above me like it might suddenly drop down, and in the awkward suspense for good. The next morning, I got up early, earlier than her, earlier than usual. I didn't want to be in the apartment when she woke up. I didn't want to hear her fake a yawn and pretend like we were still playing house. So, I left a note on the kitchen table, short and cold. "Don't talk to me until you've figured out what part of this story you're finally ready to tell the truth about." I walked to the park we used to visit when we first moved here. Back then, it was where we'd go to get away from the screens, sit on a bench, sip coffee, people watch, and dream out loud. It's amazing how many of those dreams were mine alone. I realized how many plans were only ever being entertained to keep me compliant, quiet, hopeful. I sat on the same bench where I once told her I was ready to try for kids. She cried that day, said I'd be a great dad. We never even started trying, said the timing was off. Looking back, I think she just didn't want me involved in her future that deeply. By 9 a.m., my phone started buzzing. First, it was her. I ignored it. Then again. Then a text. "Can we please talk? Just give me a chance to explain." I didn't reply. Then another. "It's not what you think, lol. I know how it looks, but it wasn't supposed to mean anything, please." Still, I said nothing. My silence, for once, was louder than any argument we'd ever had. But then, something unexpected happened. A second number texted me. This time it wasn't anonymous. It was Ellis. Ellis? I didn't know she was married when we started. She told me you were separated. I had no idea who you were until yesterday. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, stunned. That one sentence hit harder than anything she could have said. She told him we were separated. Not just struggling, but fully separated. That meant she had gone out of her way to pre-write the story. She made herself the victim. Free, unattached, available. My existence, my wedding ring, my history, my soul had been erased from the narrative by her. I didn't answer him either. I went back home around noon. When I opened the door, she was sitting at the dining table, fully dressed like she was going to church. Hair done, makeup on, face tight and tired. Her hands were folded in front of her, and next to her lay the printed photos I'd left in the envelope. She didn't look up right away. "I didn't sleep," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't eat. I haven't figured out what to say yet." I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and said nothing. I didn't want to make it easy for her, But I didn't tell him we were separated to be cruel, she added quickly. I just didn't want to explain everything. I felt stuck. Like if I said I was married, it would make me feel trapped again. I turned to her slowly. So, let me get this straight. You felt trapped in a marriage where you were free to lie, cheat, rewrite the truth, and then come home to a man who still believed in you. Her lips trembled, but I wasn't finished. You didn't feel trapped, Zoe. You felt bored. And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix anything, you went out and constructed a whole different version of yourself. One where I didn't exist. She looked away then, like a child being scolded. Only there was no parent coming to scoop her up this time. I'll pack a few things, she whispered after a long pause. Stay with a friend. Give you space. You mean Ellis? I asked sharply, and her eyes widened like I'd slapped her. No, she said quickly. God, no. That's over. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, then nodded slowly. It's not space I need, Zoe. It's clarity. You can't rebuild something if you don't even recognize the wreckage. She wiped at her cheek. Are you saying you're open to rebuilding? I didn't answer because I didn't know. I wasn't sure if I wanted to rebuild or if I just wanted to burn it all down and walk away with the ashes in my pocket. But I knew one thing for certain. She hadn't hit rock bottom yet. Not truly. And part of me, the part that had once trusted her with my whole heart, needed to see what happened when the lies ran out, and all that was left was the truth she could no longer control. She didn't pack that day. She said she needed to grab a few essentials and go. But instead, she lingered around the apartment like someone stalling on a death sentence, waiting for a last-minute call from the governor. She moved from room to room, not really doing anything, touching picture frames, adjusting the pillows on the couch, opening drawers, and closing them again. She wasn't looking for clothes. She was looking for leverage, something she could still use to tie me to her emotionally, like a thread she could yank when the unraveling got too real. I stayed quiet most of the day deliberately. I needed her to feel the weight of her own voice, her own silence, her own uncertainty. I didn't know her comfort anymore. I owed myself something for once. That was new for me. Hard, but necessary. Around 6, she finally pulled her overnight bag from the closet. She threw in a few outfits, some toiletries, a book she was pretending to read. She zipped it all up and stood in the doorway of the bedroom, not looking at me directly, but waiting like she wanted some cue, some permission to exit the stage. When I didn't give it, she walked out without another word. I watched the door close behind her, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the apartment breathe. Not a peaceful breath, more like the sharp inhale after a long, suffocating silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed and realized how quiet everything had become. No footsteps in the hallway, no kitchen cabinets being slammed, no fake humming to fill the awkwardness between us. It should have felt freeing, but all I felt was numb. I stayed up late that night, scrolling through every trace of her digital life, not out of obsession, out of necessity. I had questions, and I was tired of waiting for filtered answers. Her old emails were still accessible through the shared work portal, though she'd probably forgotten that. That's when I found something I hadn't expected. It wasn't about Ellis. It was about someone else. The name Bryce came up in a few messages, older ones from last year. There was no flirting, not on the surface, just a strange familiarity. Meetings outside work, inside jokes. One message said, "Can't believe you remembered that wine I liked. You really do pay attention." I clicked through more. A concert ticket stub in her inbox from a weekend she claimed to be visiting her sister. A photo buried in an old thread, grainy but unmistakable. Her hand resting on a man's leg in a bar booth. a bracelet on her wrist I never saw before. That was when it hit me. Ellis wasn't the beginning. He wasn't even the middle. He was just the first one dumb enough to get caught in a photo. The betrayal had layers, and I'd been living under all of them, like a man in a house with no roof, wondering why I kept waking up soaked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something, but I didn't. I just sat there rereading each thread like I was reading an obituary for the version of my life I used to believe in. The next morning, she texted, "Zoe, I'm at Karis. I don't want things to end like this. Can we talk later?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. My cousin Theo. He was the kind of guy who didn't ask too many questions unless he had to. He picked up on the third ring, and when I asked if I could crash with him for a while, he didn't even hesitate. Bring a bag. No need to explain unless you want to. That was the thing. I didn't want to explain, not yet. I just wanted to be somewhere where no one had ever said my name like it was an inconvenience, where the walls hadn't absorbed every argument, where the scent of Ellis's cologne wasn't still clinging to the throw pillows she brought home from that cute boutique last spring. I left her a note again. This one was shorter. You left me a long time ago. I'm just catching up. I grabbed a duffel, packed light, and walked out. As I passed the kitchen, I looked back at the table one last time. There, half tucked under a magazine, was something that didn't belong. An envelope addressed to her, not me. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe part instinct, maybe part habit. But inside was a business card, handwritten on the back. Thanks for last weekend. Let me know if Chicago's too small for your secrets. B. No last name, no number, just an initial. I dropped the card on the table, took one final look around, and closed the door. And that's when I realized she hadn't lost me. She'd been gambling that I'd never leave, that I'd always be the safe bet, the fool with a quiet heart and an empty threat. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the backup plan. Theo's apartment was nothing special. One bedroom, a creaky floor, and a couch that made my back ache after 20 minutes. But for the first time in a long time, I felt human again. There were no perfume traces haunting the hallway, no nervous glances across the dinner table, no artificial smiles forced into the space between passive-aggressive comments. Just silence. Peaceful, undecorated silence. He didn't ask much that first night, just handed me a beer and turned on the game, even though neither of us cared who was playing. I think he understood that silence wasn't just comfort for me, it was survival. But the next morning, as I sat in his kitchen with a chipped mug full of lukewarm coffee, the questions finally came gently. "So," he said, leaning on the counter, "you ready to tell me what kind of hell made you show up at my door without warning?" And a face like a kicked puppy. I let out something between a sigh and a half laugh. Then I told him, not everything, not yet, but enough. About the cafe, about the calendar, about Ellis, about the photos, about the card from someone named me, about how my wife of 7 years had probably been cheating on me for most of them. While I held on to date nights and shared playlists like they were proof of a future she'd already checked out of, he listened. No interruptions, no judgment. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered. "She really ran you through the mud." I nodded, and I kept thanking her for the ride. Theo shook his head, grabbed another mug, and poured himself a coffee. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "You're still halfway hoping she texts something that makes it all make sense." And he was right. I didn't want her back, but I still wanted her to say something that would pull the pieces into a picture that didn't make me look like an idiot. Some kind of narrative that made her betrayals feel like a detour instead of a full exit. But that illusion was shattered before I even left the apartment that morning. Because when I opened my inbox, not my personal one, but the shared company account I still hadn't been locked out of, I saw something I wasn't meant to see. An invitation sent accidentally, probably from one of her automatic contact groups. Subject: Zoe and Ellis, New Horizons launch mixer. Location: the Howbridge rooftop. Date: Friday, 7:00 p.m. Note: join us to celebrate a fresh start with friends, colleagues, and opportunity. My throat went dry. I read it twice, then 3 times. A fresh start. I hadn't even filed for separation yet. She was still married to me legally, emotionally, in name, in every file and tax document. And she was already throwing cocktail parties with him. And she had the audacity to invite me. I couldn't stop laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was insane, absurd. Like I'd stepped into some twisted, alternate version of my life, where I was the punchline of a joke no one even bothered to hide anymore. I didn't reply. I didn't send her a message. I didn't call. Instead, I forwarded the invitation to Theo. His response came seconds later. "You going?" I stared at the screen. My first thought was, no, of course not. Why would I walk into that? But then another part of me stirred. A smaller part. Angrier. Colder. The part that had sat in silence at that cafe and watched her laugh like I didn't exist. The part that had read emails from men who only existed in her life because she rewrote the script. I texted back, but not for the drinks. The next few days blurred. Zoe sent a few more messages, each more frantic than the last. She said she'd been reevaluating everything. She said she needed time to think. She said Ellis had meant something once, but not anymore. She said we had roots and history, and that maybe we rushed the separation. Except we hadn't even separated yet. That was her latest move, trying to paint herself as a woman who was confused, overwhelmed, lost. Not deceitful, just misled. As if confusion could explain a year's worth of coordinated lies and hotel receipts. Friday came faster than I expected. Theo drove me to the event. I didn't plan to stay long. I just wanted to see it. To see her. To see what she looked like when the room was full. And the spotlight wasn't under her control. The Hellridge rooftop was polished, trendy, with too many people holding half-empty champagne flutes and pretending they weren't judging each other. And there she was, Zoe, in a silver dress I'd never seen before. Her hair swept back, smiling that same rehearsed smile I used to think was just for me. Ellis was beside her, smug in a way that only someone who's never faced real consequences can be. They were greeting people, posing for photos, clinking glasses. But then she turned, and she saw me. And for the first time she looked scared. Not confused, not guilty. Scared. Because for once, I wasn't where she expected me to be. I wasn't home waiting. I wasn't hurt and hiding. I was standing across the room, holding a glass I didn't drink from, wearing the wedding band she never asked me to remove. And she knew. She knew the show was over. She tried to recover quickly. That's what she was always good at. Snapping back into performance mode, as if seeing me at her affair partner's rooftop celebration didn't rattle her to her core. But the fear in her eyes lingered, even as she smiled thinly, and excused herself from the group she was entertaining. Ellis looked up too, his grin faltering when he realized where her attention had shifted. He followed her gaze until his eyes landed on me. I watched the color drain from his face, like a man realizing he'd left the back door wide open, and the storm was already inside. Zero stepped toward me slowly, her heels clicking across the polished concrete like a metronome, counting down to something she couldn't control. Her mouth opened slightly, but before she could speak, I calmly raised my hand, not in anger, but like I was motioning for her to pause, and she did. Right there in the middle of the rooftop, she had transformed into her new kingdom. She stopped. "Don't," I said, quiet but firm. "Not here, not now." A few people turned, recognizing me. Whispers started. It was subtle but unmistakable. One woman from the design department looked at me, then Zoe, then Ellis, her eyes bouncing like a pinball, and I could almost see the equation solving in her head. The gossip would spread like wildfire. And that was the point. She tried to lower her voice. "Lel, please, let's talk somewhere private." I leaned in just slightly, close enough that she'd feel the heat of her mistake come right back at her. "You threw a party with the man you cheated on me with. You emailed half the company. There's nothing private left." She blinked rapidly, her confidence melting away by the second. Ellis stepped forward then, like he thought this was his moment to step up, to be her knight in wrinkled linen armor. "Man, look," he started, raising both hands like I was a bomb about to go off. "I didn't know. I told you. If I'd known you were still together, I would have." "What?" I interrupted, turning to him. "You would have what?" Waited until after the divorce was finalized before sleeping with her in hotel room she booked with our joint credit card. He flinched at that. A few more people turned. Conversations paused. Glasses froze. Madare. And then, right on cue, Theo walked in. He wasn't dressed for the party. No jacket, no slick back hair, just jeans, a black shirt, and an expression that said he was only here to make sure I didn't back down. He walked straight toward me, put a hand on my shoulder, and nodded like this was just another Tuesday. And then he said it. The line that shattered the glass over every cocktail in the room. "So, this is the guy you threw away your marriage for?" Yikes, you could hear a fork drop. Zoe turned a shade paler than I thought human skin could go. Ellis actually stepped back, like Theo had physically shoved him. I looked Zoe in the eye. Really looked. And what I saw wasn't just shame. It was collapse. She wasn't in control of the story anymore. She wasn't the misunderstood wife or the powerful career woman navigating difficult choices. She was just a woman, standing in the ruins of a life she thought she could cheat her way out of. I took a breath. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and set it on the tray of untouched champagne beside me. "You don't get to rewrite what happened," I said. "You don't get to reframe the timeline, or recast the villain, or crop me out of the story." She stared at the ring like it had betrayed her. "Lau, wait," she whispered, stepping closer. "We can still talk. I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." I stepped back. "You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me quiet, reliable, always waiting at home while you tried on other lives to see if they fit better." Her lip trembled. "You don't understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "And yet," I said, "you managed to anyway, Theo." And I turned to leave. I didn't look back. Even when I heard a glass fall. Even when I heard someone call Zoe's name like she might faint. Even when Ellis muttered something under his breath that sounded like an apology to no one in particular. Downstairs, we stepped into the night air. It was cool, breezy, and for the first time in what felt like years, I could actually breathe. "She's going to call you tonight," Theo said as we walked toward his car. "I know," I replied. "You going to answer?" I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I smiled, not bitterly, but peacefully, and said, "Only if I feel like hearing another lie." He laughed. That's the guy I was hoping would show up. I leaned against the car, closed my eyes for a second, and whispered to myself, "She can't rewrite it now. Not with this ending." And somehow, that felt better than revenge. That night, she did call. I let it ring. Then she called again. This time, she left a voicemail. I sat on Theo's worn-out couch, with the phone buzzing beside me, screen glowing with her name. The same name that used to make my heart skip. Now, just a flicker of static. I didn't play the message. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would go. Tears. Apologies. Excuses. Something about confusion. Maybe a mention of therapy. Possibly a vague promise that things could be different. But I wasn't waiting for her to change anymore. I was changing. And I needed the silence more than I needed her voice. In the days that followed, something in me started to settle. Not like dust, but like roots. For the first time in years, I was waking up without that invisible pressure in my chest, the kind that made you second-guess your worth before your feet even hit the floor. I walked more. I journaled. I called my mom. I remembered what my own laughter sounded like. Zoe texted again. Long messages, paragraphs filled with regret, reflection, desperation. She said the party was a mistake. Syed Ellis was out of her life. That it wasn't real, whatever it was. But I didn't respond because she still didn't get it. The betrayal wasn't about a single man or a series of bad choices. It was about a razor. And I'd spent enough time trying to convince someone to see me when she'd already closed her eyes. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the rooftop event, I got an email from a woman named Ria. She worked in ITE, someone I barely knew. We had exchanged maybe 5 words in all our years at the firm. She wrote, I saw what happened at the mixer. I just wanted to say you weren't invisible. People noticed, and I hope you're doing okay. I stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled. It was small, simple, but it was the first time in a while someone saw me, and not just as an accessory to someone else's story. That week, I filed the paperwork. No drama, no fanfare, just a quiet signature on a quiet afternoon. I mailed it, walked out of the building, and stood on the sidewalk, breathing like the city had finally stopped pressing down on me. And then something surprising happened. Ria invited me for coffee. Not a date, just coffee. We sat by the window of a quiet cafe on a rainy Tuesday. The kind of day I used to dread, but now the sound of the rain felt comforting. She talked about poetry, about her dog, about her awful cooking. I told her about Theo's couch and the crooked floor lamp I was still fighting with. We laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. At the end of the hour, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." And I was. Not because I found someone new, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally stopped carrying the weight of someone else's dishonesty as if it was mine. Months later, Zoe messaged one last time. She said she heard I was doing better, that she hoped I was happy, that she'd always care about me. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because I'd finally learned that peace doesn't require a performance, and that healing, real healing, doesn't come when the other person says they're sorry. It comes when you stop needing them to. So here I am. Not broken, not bitter, just